people have been promised. It's not what they want. It's not what they expected, but it is what they are finding out that they have received now that the law has passed. So, Madam President, this clearly explains why Republicans in the Senate and the House continue to be committed to repealing the President's health care law. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
The Senator from Ohio.
I ask unanimous consent to address the House or address the Senate for up to 15 minutes as if the morning business.
With that,
if I could just
the Senator from California.
My friend through the chair, would it be possible for me to have 2 minutes prior to your statement?
So certainly.
And then
I yield
following
I yield to the Senator from California.
Thank you.
The Senator from California.
Thank you. I just wanted to take 2 minutes to respond to Senator Barrasso, who offered his second opinion. And I hope my colleague will also talk about that. But I have to say, it is stunning to see the assault on women's health that is taking place from the Republican Party day after day after day. First, they tried to stop women from getting breast screening. Then they tried to stop us from getting cervical cancer screening. And now they're going after our ability to get birth control. And I have to say this. We know that for a full 15% of women, birth control is pure medicine. They suffer from debilitating monthly pain, endometriosis. We have stories of women who couldn't afford the birth control pills and a cyst got out of hand and they lost an ovary. We know that birth control is used for very serious skin condition. So if they want to stand up here and say that women don't have a right to our medicine, that's their right to do it. But don't put it into the frame of religious freedom, because we know that President Obama said that he was going to do what 28 states have done, and that is make sure that women who work in this country have the ability to get access to birth control pills through their insurance. That's as simple as it gets. 28 states do it. I never heard a word out of them. Never. And 8 of those states have no exception when President Obama made an exception for 335,000 churches. So let's not stand here and talk about, the overreach of the federal government and the rest of it. The fact is our states have been doing this for years. More than 50% of women in this nation have the ability to get contraception. It's about health. It's the Institute of Medicine that said it's critical. It will cut down on tens of thousands of abortions when families plan their families. So, Madam President, as long as our colleagues on the other side want to make women a political football in this country, there are many of us here, women and men alike, who are going to stand sentry, who are going to say, you can't do this to the women of this nation. This is the 21st century, and we're arguing about birth control instead of how to get out of this economic malaise. Finally, we're seeing light at the end of the tunnel. Oh, no. I'm hoping we go to a highway bill this afternoon. But we have to now have this diversion about an issue that was resolved, frankly, in the 50s and the 60s. So thank you for this opportunity. Senator Barrasso has a right to his second opinion, but I think his opinion is off the mark. And I yield the floor.
The Senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate the comments from the Senator from California, and I see that. She is on the floor today with Senator Inhofe, 2 unlikely peas in a pod, one pretty liberal, one pretty conservative, very different on views. They're both on the floor right now, and they both came to the floor to talk about job creation, about infrastructure, about building highways and bridges and public transit and all that, and job creation. And then, as so often is the case, people on the other side so often want to change the subject. In my state, the elections 2 years ago, year and a half ago, were all about lost jobs, about lost manufacturing jobs that, frankly, accelerated during the Bush years, and we finally turned that manufacturing job loss around. We've seen 20 straight months of job increase in manufacturing. But the legislature in Columbus, my state capital, and the governor, what are they doing? They're not fighting for job creation. They're going after worker rights. They're going after women's rights. Something called the Heartbeat Bill is pretty extreme. They're going after voter rights instead of focusing on job creation. That's what I came to the floor to do, too, today, not specifically on this bill, but another kind of infrastructure bill, which I'll get to in a moment. But what else that the comments that I heard from Senator Barrasso only near the end of his discussion was that they wanted to repeal the health care law. How do they tell a 23-year-old who now is on her mother's insurance, 23-year-old that's got a job but doesn't have insurance, that she's going to lose her insurance that she's on with her mother, or because her mother has insurance plan, she's going to be thrown off her insurance? How are they going to explain to the family they have a child with a pre-existing condition that now can get insurance when the insurance company denied it before? How are they going to explain it to the Medicare retiree, the 72-year-old woman on Medicare who now gets no copay, no deductible, free screenings for osteoporosis, or the man that gets prostate screenings? How are they going to explain that? They want to repeal that. How are they going to explain the fact that they want to repeal one of the most insidious They want to repeal our stopping one of the most insidious insurance company practices, that if you get too sick and you're too expensive, insurance companies just cut you off. They want to repeal that prohibition. I guess it's because they want to do the insurance companies' bidding over and over and over again. That's a big part of their game. But it just breaks my heart when I see the progress we've made, the millions of Americans now that will have health insurance. And I know that, Senator, my colleagues, everybody in this body has good health insurance. People in this body are generally pretty affluent. People in this body have good government insurance. But they don't want millions of men and women in our country, people who have lost jobs, people who are working without insurance. They don't want them to have insurance, all for some political gain of repealing Obamacare. It's too bad. I want to focus on job creation. That's why, Madam President, I want to make some remarks on some legislation I introduced today that's not directly Senator Boxer's and Senator Inhofe's highway bill, but it's about water and sewer systems and infrastructure. Earlier today, I was on a call with Tony Parrott, Executive Director of the Metropolitan Sewer District in Cincinnati. We talked about how communities in Ohio are struggling to afford the necessary upgrades to improve sewer systems. In parts of the state with something called combined sewer systems, every time there are heavy rains, waste in stormwater overflows, the sewers overflow, the water is dumped into our rivers and our creeks and our lakes. The Environmental Protection Agency estimates that 800 billion gallons of untreated water, wastewater, and stormwater from these combined sewage overflow, these combined sewer systems, are released into our rivers, lakes, and streams each year. It poses a threat to public health and the environment. It undermines the competitiveness of our businesses. So not only does building these water and sewer systems and upgrades create jobs, but we also know if we don't, that local businesses aren't going to expand. If they are not certain they're going to have good, clean water available and at a decent cost, at a reasonable cost, they're not going to expand their businesses, especially if it's manufacturing. The cost of addressing these combined sewage overflow systems in Ohio is some $6 billion, according to the EPA, $1 billion in northeast Ohio, the Cleveland area, $2 billion in southwest Ohio, the Cincinnati area. So that's why today, Mr. President, because there are 81 Ohio communities requiring water infrastructure improvements, I'm reintroducing the Clean Water Affordability Act. A couple of Congresses, previous Congresses, I introduced this legislation with my Republican colleague from Ohio, Senator Voinovich. It will protect local ratepayers. It will lead to cleaner water. It will promote economic development. It would invest $1.8 billion to be distributed over the next 5 years through a grant program for financially distressed communities administered by EPA Administrator Jackson. I've spoken to her concerning conveying the concern of Ohio's CSO communities. The program provides a 75-25 cost share, similar to what we've done on highway issues in the past, 75% federal government costs, 25% local government costs. It's estimated that every $1 billion invested in infrastructure, similar to the highway bill that Senators Inhofe and Boxer are working on, will that for every $1 billion invested, upwards of 20,000 jobs would be created. It would promote green infrastructure. Cities like Bucyrus or Steubenville should be encouraged to use green infrastructure if it costs less than traditional construction and produces the same environmental benefits. I will continue to work with mayors like Dave Berger in Lima and Bob Armstrong in Defiance and county commissioners and others who have explained to me how years of reduced infrastructure investments have eroded their water and sewer systems. Closing, Mr. President, the United States, when we were kids, the 1950s and 60s and 70s and into the 80s, the United States infrastructure was the envy of the world, whether it was the interstate system, whether it was the federal, state, local partnerships on water and sewer systems, whether it was the building of community colleges and the beginnings of technology and wiring for our telecommunication systems in the 50s and 60s and 70s. We were the envy of the world. Today, because so many in this government think that that we need to cut spending at all costs on everything. We simply haven't kept up with the infrastructure. It's why countries like China, who are investing so much money in infrastructure, we have a risk of their passing us by in manufacturing all the things that we care about that build a solid middle class. This legislation is an economic development imperative. This legislation is an imperative for citizens of our country having clean drinking water, safe drinking water, a predictable access to water at a reasonable cost. It's important for our families. It's important for our communities. It's important for business development. It's important for a strong middle-class manufacturing country, which we still are. I ask my colleagues to support this important legislation I'm introducing today. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Kaka.
Mr. President.
The senator from Maryland is recognized.
I would ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I take this time to urge my colleagues to let us proceed on the reauthorization of the Surface Transportation Act, S. 1813. This is a critically important bill that I'm proud to be on two committees that have had jurisdiction over this bill, the Environment and Public Works Committee, where Senator Boxer and Senator Inhofe have worked together to bring out a bill that received the unanimous support of our committee. I also serve on the Senate Finance Committee, where Senator Balkus and Senator Hatch have worked together so that we have the sufficient revenues in order to be able to finance the reauthorization bill during its 2-year reauthorization. This bill is so important to our country. First, it gives predictability to our state and local governments. It gives predictability to highway engineers. It gives predictability to contractors to know that the funding will be there in order to advance our transportation programs. When we do these short-term extensions, it really does cause significant problems for planners. If you're trying to plan a transportation project, you need to know that the funding is going to be there for more than just a few months. You need to have some degree of predictability, and this legislation will allow us to give that predictability to those who are involved in these decision-making. It's been since 2009 since we last reauthorized the Surface Transportation Act. It's time for us to act. This bill will also help us as far as American competitiveness is concerned. We need to have modern transportation infrastructure, whether it's our highways, our bridges, our transit systems. We need to make sure that we can meet the challenges of today's society. I could talk just in this region, Mr. President, about our needs in the transit area. We have one of the most congested communities in the nation, in the Washington, D.C. Many of my constituents who live in Maryland come into work every day working for the federal government using the mass transit system. That system is aged and needs attention. We need to provide the financing necessary in order to be as competitive as we can with transportation options to the people of this country. This bill is important for jobs. You'll hear that over and over again. In Maryland, the passage of this bill will preserve or expand 10,000 jobs to the people of Maryland. I expect that you would have similar numbers in New Mexico. It's important in every state in this nation. It's also important for safety. I'll just give you one number in Maryland that really has me concerned. There are 359 bridges in the state of Maryland that have been rated structurally deficient, in which 4.6 million motorists travel over those bridges every day. Now, the state of Maryland is taking steps to make sure that the motorist is safe, but we need to fix those bridges in a more permanent way. And the longer we wait, the more it costs. Deferred maintenance means that we're not doing what we should to protect the future needs of our community. This legislation puts a heavy priority on maintaining our infrastructure, our transportation infrastructure, so that it's safe and we can move forward into the future. The legislation is balanced between transit and highway. Now, I know in certain regions of this country, highways are the principal means of transportation, and their interest in transit isn't quite as great as it is if you represent the people of New York, or you represent the people of Maryland, or you represent the people in an urban center where public transit becomes a very important part of our transportation needs. This legislation is balanced to take care of the needs of our highways and the needs of our transit system. And I think it's a credit to that balance that in the Environment and Public Works Committee and the Banking Committee, the two committees that have principal jurisdiction over the highway program and over the transit program, that we had unanimous support on bringing this bill forward. That's how we should be proceeding in considering legislation. We have that type of bipartisan cooperation because this bill is properly balanced. And let me also point out, we have received hundreds of letters of organizations that support the passage of the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Act. We had the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and we have AFL-CIO. We got businesses, we have labor groups. We got local communities, we have national groups. This bill has been put together in a way where we can get it done this year, and it would be very, very important for the people of this country and for our economy. Let me just talk a little bit about my state of Maryland with the Maryland Department of Transportation. They've given us a list of projects that will move forward if we can get this bill reauthorized. It's from the Beltway around Baltimore to critical roads in Montgomery and Prince George's County to our rural areas, and we could share some of those specific examples. But this will affect the ability of Maryland to move forward with critical roads and transit needs, and we need to get that done. I want to talk a little bit about some of the specific issues that are in the bill that I want to highlight. The Appalachia highway system is one that we have put a separate provision historically in the code because we recognize to bring economic opportunity to that part of our nation, which includes West Virginia, it includes Maryland, it includes Pennsylvania, it also includes some of our southern states that are in the Appalachia highway region. It's tough to get jobs there. I was just recently in the most western part of Maryland, up in Garrett County, and I can tell you that it's difficult to get companies to move into that region. And one of the problems, you got to get over the mountains. It's not easy to get over the mountains. We have a real opportunity around Cumberland, Maryland, to be able to expand dramatically the economic opportunities and jobs by completing the north-south highway that goes through Pennsylvania, Maryland, and West Virginia. Now, Mr. President, there's reason to celebrate in this bill that could become a reality. There's an amendment that I had offered that's included in this legislation that provides the toll credits so that we can advance this project. That was a major issue needed, particularly in the Pennsylvania part of this north-south highway. So we do have reason to celebrate in this legislation a way of completing the Appalachia highway system in my part of the region. Senator Rockefeller has been working very closely on this issue, and I really applaud his leadership on it. We're going to be looking to see whether we can't provide some additional, through amendments to this bill, where we might be able to strengthen more to make sure that these projects get the priority that they're entitled to. We have, for the sake of flexibility, combined many of the specific programs into more general programs. That's part of the balance in this legislation, to give greater flexibility to local governments. That's important. But we also want to make sure that the national priorities receive the attention that they need, and the Appalachia highway system is a national priority. We want to make sure that it's in fact done. I wear another hat as chair of the Water and Wildlife Subcommittee on the Environment and Public Works Committee, and I want to do everything we can to make sure that the federal government, as a partner in developing highways and roads and transit systems, does what's important for clean water in our community. And a large part of the pollutants that enter into our waters come from storm runoff. In the Chesapeake Bay region, it is the largest growth source of pollutants going into the Chesapeake Bay come from storm runoff. Well, highway construction can help or hurt storm runoff. If you do it the right way, you actually can help keep pollutants out of our streams and rivers and bays. So I am hopeful that during the discussion of this bill on the floor of the Senate that we'll look for ways that we can make this bill helpful in the best practices being used in order to deal with storm runoff as we deal with major transportation programs in this country. One of the programs that I have spent a lot of time on is the Transportation Enhancement Programs, the TE programs. That has been used by local governments to do things that are critically important to our community. I could talk about bicycle paths, I could talk about passed that have connected communities that have allowed us to take cars off the road. This is a small amount of money, but it becomes very important for getting motorists off the roads. We have the use of the transportation enhancement programs, so it's safety for motorists who want to pull off to the side of the road to see the vistas. Well, we've used the funds for that. That's a safety issue. So transportation enhancements are important programs. We want to make sure that that flexibility and funding opportunities remain, and Chairman Boxer has been very careful to work out an arrangement so that we can advance that, and I thank her for that. I've been working with Senator Cochran, and we are hoping to offer an amendment that will make it clear that we need to work with the local governments as we look at how the transportation enhancement funds are being used. Let me tell you another opportunity that I think we could have in consideration of this bill, and that deals with our veterans. There's a way that we could use the training that veterans receive while in military service to help when they come back here as far as truck drivers are concerned. And we're looking for an amendment in regards to that area where we could advance that issue. So there are many areas in this bill that we think are extremely important to advance our needs. It's a bipartisan bill. We've got to get this done, and I know Senator Boxer is on the floor, and once again, I just want to compliment her for her patience and leadership to work through each of these issues. We are looking forward to a robust debate on the floor of the Senate. I hope that members who have amendments will allow us to proceed. Let's take a look at amendments, but let's proceed in the spirit in which the Environment and Public Works Committee, the Banking Committee, and the Finance Committee reported the bills to the Senate, and that is listen to each other, don't lose sight of the prize of getting this bill done, be willing to compromise so that we can maintain the type of bipartisan cooperation we need in order to get this bill enacted. And if we do that, we will be doing something so important to our country. This bill will create jobs. This bill will help our economic recovery. This bill will help our future. And I'm proud to be part of the group that has brought this bill forward to the floor of the United States Senate. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor. But before I do that, I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Delaware.
Mr. President, good afternoon. I rise today. First, I'd ask, are we in a quorum call?
Yes,
I'd ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be initiated.
without objection.
I rise this afternoon, Mr. President, to say hello and also to speak in favor of moving ahead for progress in the 21st century, something that most Americans, almost all Americans, got to be in favor of. And a lot of them knew about this legislation. I think they'd be in favor of it, too. It's been, can I ask you to put that over there, please? Yeah. It's been 862 days since Safety Lou expired, 862. The legislation was written in 2003. It passed this body and signed into law in 2005. We've extended that legislation, Safety Lou, 8 times since it expired in 2009. Brought it back from the dead 8 times. John Chambers, who's the CEO of a big technology company called Cisco, likes to say that the key to global economic competitiveness is having the best workforce and the best infrastructure in the world. He has said that that's where the jobs will go in the 21st century. Best workforce, best infrastructure, you'll get the jobs. And we must continue to modernize in the spirit of those words, modernize and maintain our infrastructure if it's to remain the best. So I want to start today by congratulating Senator Boxer. I want to congratulate Senator Inhofe for pulling together, and their staffs, and subcommittee staffs as well. I want to start by congratulating them for pulling together a bipartisan transportation bill that begins to address America's infrastructure needs. And this comes on the heels of our passing here earlier this week a conference report, a compromise on FAA reauthorizations to bring the air traffic control system of our country into the 21st century, and to also begin rebuilding and improving our airports as well. This is a pretty good 1-2 punch in a period of one week. But this legislation before us today makes key reforms to our federal transportation policy that will help make us the best use of our taxpayers' dollars. The legislation sets clear national goals for transportation investments. We don't just throw money at this problem, we actually do so to achieve a number of specific goals. And this bill asks state transportation departments to do their part to achieve those national goals. It accomplished this by implementing new performance measures that will help to hold states accountable for the outcomes of the investments that we're prepared to make. This will ensure that we're building the most effective multimodal transportation network we can, but by putting our dollars to the most productive use. Passing this legislation is critically important to America's economic health at home and our competitiveness abroad. We've heard that here today. We'll hear it for the next several days. This legislation, if adopted and signed into law, will create or save several millions of jobs in a day when we need every job that we can save or create, both here in states like New Mexico, states like Delaware, and 48 other states as well. In my state of Delaware, for example, we're planning significant new transportation investments. We already got a bunch of them underway, but new ones that will contribute to our state's productivity. Some of those will help to relieve congestion along important corridors as I-95. We've already done some good work in putting in highway speed easy pass on I-95 through a toll plaza to expedite and move the flow of traffic. And we're now working on a big intersection where I-95 intersects with State Route 1, a major north-south highway. And it's been a big bottleneck for years, and we've got some good work going on under there. We want to be able to finish that. But other improvements will allow shippers to move freight more quickly and reliably down roads such as Route 301, which comes up through Maryland and through the Delmarva Peninsula into Delaware. On its way to I-95. Well, each of my colleagues could no doubt talk about similar efforts in their states. Each of these projects is part of our national transportation system. Taken together, this system is greater than the sum of its parts. Having a world-class transportation system has helped to make America what it is today. This bill will ensure that we have a transportation system that allows America to return to prosperity and to grow that prosperity. So I'm looking forward to debating this bill on the Senate floor. I appreciate the time to get started on that here today. As a senator and as a recovering governor, I know that everything I do, I can do better. And so as good as this legislation is, I think there's always room for improvement. I've never introduced a perfect bill. My friend who's presiding over the Senate may have, but I'm not sure. But as good as this legislation is, there's room for improvement. I plan to bring forward a couple of amendments that I think will improve this bill, and I hope my colleagues will support them. We've talked about a few of them, actually, in the markup, the full committee. For example, I believe that we need to do more on the issue of traffic congestion. Anybody who drove, I go back and forth on the train just about every day and night, as my colleagues know, and every day, every morning, I see traffic lined up for miles, trying to get from north to south and basically parallel to the northeast corridor of Amtrak, as we zip along at 125 miles per hour. And this city, I think, just was recognized as maybe the most congested city in America with respect to traffic congestion. In fact, I'm told in 2010, drivers in U.S. more urban areas, suburban areas, wasted some, listen to this, 1.9 billion gallons of fuel due to traffic congestion. That's almost 2 billion gallons of fuel. Congestion is a major challenge in larger U.S. cities and increasingly even in smaller cities and towns, too. The burden of and cost of traffic congestion is felt by both travelers and freight shippers, diminishing our quality of life and costing us money. According to the Texas Transportation Institute, and they come up with this study and analysis every year, but according to the Texas Transportation Institute, the average commuter across the country spent 34 hours sitting in traffic, not moving at 40 or 30 or 20, 10 miles an hour, sitting in traffic, 34 hours. And that's up from 14 hours in 1982. This burden lowers productivity and results in wasted fuel, costing Americans more than $100 billion in 2010, or nearly $750 wasted for every commuter. Traffic congestion is also increasingly hurting the reliability of the transportation system, which is particularly important due to freight shippers, where the value each minute can be as much as $5. That's about $300 an hour. As America's economy continues to recover, we must make sure that traffic is not a drag on job growth. And according to that same Texas Transportation Institute, by 2015, 3 years from now, the cost of gridlock is going to rise from $101 billion to something like $133 billion. Now, that's the bad news. There's some good news, too. And fortunately, we have new tools to address congestion. For example, better management of accidents, improved timing of traffic signals, real-time traveler information, and managed toll lanes. And I'll talk more about managed toll lanes probably next week. But they all provide low-cost congestion benefits. They're smart. They're being successfully used on a smaller scale around the country. They're ideas that we want to replicate in cities and counties and states across our country. These are just a few of the strategies that have been helping passengers and freight shippers to better anticipate, better avoid, and better manage the impact of congestion. So I'll offer an amendment that would, in the states that with the worst congestion, target funding at these cost-effective congestion relief strategies. My amendment will help to give Americans some of their time and money back. It'll help shippers grow their businesses, too. I hope my colleagues will support it. Second, I believe that anything worth having is worth paying for. If we will not rise or raise user fees at the federal level, we should at least stop prohibiting states from doing so if that makes sense for them. So I'll be offering an amendment that will give states more flexibility to use tolls and user fees on their roadways. An increasing number of states are looking at tolls and user fees as a source of funding, and the federal government shouldn't stand in their way. We've used tolls as a source of revenues in Delaware for years, and it's helped to maintain and improve the critical I-95 corridor that I mentioned. Also has helped to provide an excellent corridor, north-south corridor, stretches all the way from I-95 in the northern part of our state to down past the Dover Air Force Base in the central part of Delaware. Toll revenue is often a critical part of forming public public-private partnerships, which I know many of my colleagues support. So I hope my colleagues will join me in supporting this amendment as well. In closing, I'll just again say that Congress needs to act on transportation legislation. The rest of the country is counting on us. They're counting on us. The infrastructure of our country gets graded on an annual basis by, among others, the engineers of our nation. And they look at transportation more broadly. It's not just roads, highways, bridges. It's not just airports. It's not just railroads. It's not just ports. It's not just water, wastewater treatment system. They look at all of it. And last year, the grade that they gave us, Mr. President, was a D. And that's not a D as in delightful. That is not a D as in distinguished. That's in a maybe more in the area of derelict. And the idea is that we could do a whole lot better. We've taken action this week with respect to our air traffic controlling systems. We've taken a step toward beginning to rebuild and improve our airports. The legislation here will get us going for the next 24 months to make our roads, highways, and bridges safer, less congested, and something that we can treasure as a real asset. Last thing I want to say is this. My colleagues have heard me say this once or twice. It bears repeating. A major job of government, not the only job of government, but a major job of government, is to provide a nurturing environment for job creation and job preservation. It's not the only job of government, but it's a big job of government. And a big part of creating that nurturing environment for job creation, job preservation, is a road, highway, bridge infrastructure that we can all be proud of and that will serve our needs as we go forward into the 21st century. And this legislation will help get us and head in that direction for the next couple of years. And it's important that we follow on the heels of this and don't just waste 2 years figuring out, well, what do we do next? But we build on this to do even smarter things in the years to come. That having been said, I look to see if anybody wants time. I don't see anybody wanting time. Madam Chair, let me just say it again while you're on the floor. Thanks a lot for your leadership on this. And it's for people who say, why can't Congress ever get anything done? Why can't Democrats and Republicans work together? I think the way that you and Senator Inhofe have worked on this legislation, the way your staffs have worked together on this legislation is really a great model for the rest of us. And we thank you both for that leadership. And I yield.
Thank you. Mr. President.
Senator from California is recognized.
Mr. President, I want to thank the senator from Delaware because he, as well as you, are very important members of this great committee, the Environment and Public Works Committee. And as one of our most senior members, he's taken a tremendous interest in every single thing we do. And I look to his leadership on a number of things, including controlling mercury, which is dear to his heart and mine both. He's a leader on nuclear plant safety, and he's been extremely helpful. I just want to thank him for the very good role he plays in that committee. We will have a number of amendments. It's going to be delicate with the amendment process, but it's fine. I encourage everyone, if they have germane amendments, like Senator, want to go for it, go for it. But we have an agreement that the leadership on the committee, we're either going to all go for an amendment or not, because we don't want to stymie this. But I appreciate everything you've done. I appreciate your giving us an alert that you're going to offer these two amendments. And I would urge you to get them to us so we can share them with Senator Inhofe. Let me say we have received yet another letter of support, which I'm very proud to put in the record, if I might, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent to do that.
Without objection.
Thank you. It's a letter from the Transportation Construction Coalition, and they are urging all of us for an aye vote on the motion to proceed to the transportation bill. And they have said, you know, wonderful things about our bill, that they like the steps we've taken to accelerate all the reviews and flexibility for the states and greater authority for our states, and the fact that we did this in a comprehensive way, we did this in a bipartisan way, and I'm very grateful. And what I'd like to do is read the names of these organizations, because it just shows you the depth in America, the depth of support in America for this bill. The American Road and Transportation Builders, the Associated General Contractors, the American Coal Ash Association, the American Concrete Pavement Association, the Concrete Pipe Association, the American Council of Engineering Companies, American Subcontractors Association, American Iron and Steel Institute, American Society of Civil Engineers, American Traffic Safety Services, the Asphalt Emulsion Manufacturers, the Asphalt Recycling and Reclaiming Association, the Association of Equipment Manufacturers, the Concrete Reinforcing Steel Institute, the International Slurry Surfacing Association, the International Association of Bridge, Structural, Ornamental and Reinforcing Iron Workers, International Union of Operating Engineers, the Laborers Cooperation and Education Trust, the Laborers International Union of North America, the National Asphalt Pavement Association, the National Association of Surety Bond Producers, the National Ready Mixed Concrete Association, the National Stone, Sand and Gravel Association, the National Utility Contractors Association, the Portland Cement Association, the Precast Pre-Stressed Concrete Institute, the Road Information Program, and the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners of America. The reason I read these 29 organizations, there are 1,000 organizations behind our bill. I just want colleagues to understand how people have come together from all sides of the aisle. The union workers, the non-union workers, the businesses, the union businesses, the non-union, everybody's come together, Democrats, Republicans and independents on our committees. And the reason is we're coming out of a very, very tough and deep recession where housing was hurt deeply, and we're having a very tough time coming out of the housing recession. So construction workers have a 15% or more unemployment rate compared to an 8.3 unemployment rate in the rest of the workforce. If you put them into Super Bowl stadiums, it would fill, the unemployed construction workers, 15 Super Bowl stadiums. That's what it would look like. If you imagine what that looks like, everyone sitting in those stadiums. We have an obligation to come together in behalf of jobs, in behalf of an aging infrastructure that needs to be fixed. We've got bridges collapsing. We've got roads not up to par. We've got problems in this nation, and we can solve them. And we can solve them only if we come together. And I would submit, and I'll end here because I know my colleague would like the floor, and it's fine, I'm going to end at this point. I think we have an opportunity around the 2:15 hour or so to come together united, to give a great vote of confidence to this bill, to move it ahead with an overwhelming vote. I'm hoping for, maybe I'm just dreaming here, but I'm hoping for well over 60 votes to go forward here. And then let's get to the amendment process. Let's not offer extraneous amendments that have to do with everything but transportation. Let's keep this focused. And then we can get to the conference, and then we can get a bill to the President. And in closing, it would mean if our bill is the law of the land, we would save 1.8 million jobs and be able to create up to another million jobs. There's a lot riding here on this bill, if I might say, and I hope we'll all come together this afternoon. Mr. President, thank you for your indulgence, and I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination, the Judiciary, Kathy Ann Benchivengo of California to be United States District Judge for the Southern District of California.
Under the previous order, there will be 30 minutes of debate equally divided prior to the vote on the nomination, with the time already consumed counted towards the majority's portion.
Mr. President.
Senator from California is recognized.
Mr. President, I rise to speak on behalf of the nomination of Magistrate Judge Kathy Benchivengo to the position of District Judge for the Southern California District. When I finish, I would ask for a few moments on morning business. Mr. President, Judge Benchivengo will fill a judicial emergency vacancy in a judicial district along the southwest border. It has one of the highest and most rapidly increasing criminal caseloads in the country. The Southern District of California includes San Diego and Imperial counties. It borders Mexico, and it consequently has a large immigration caseload. It ranks fourth in the country in terms of criminal case filings per authorized judgeship. The district's former judge, Irma Gonzalez, wrote me a letter urging Judge Benchivengo's confirmation and highlighting the felony caseload crisis in the district. As Chief Judge Gonzalez explained, since 2008, criminal case filings have increased by 42% and civil case filings by 25%. In the past fiscal year alone, criminal cases had risen 17% up to the time of her letter. It is, in fact, a judicial emergency. The Southern District's criminal caseload, measured by criminal filings per judgeship, rose from 375.
The senator is advised the previous allotted time has expired.
May I ask consent to speak for 7 minutes?
Without objection.
Thank you very much. I'll cut some of this out. Let me tell you a little bit about Judge Benjavengo. She is a consensus nominee who was approved by the Judiciary Committee by a voice vote. Now, that does not often happen. There was no objection from any colleague on any side of the aisle. She was recommended to me by a bipartisan judicial selection committee, which I have established in California, to advise me in recommending judicial nominees to the President. This committee reviews judicial candidates based on their legal skill, reputation, experience, temperament, and overall commitment to excellence. Judge Benjavengo has been a United States magistrate judge in San Diego for the last 6 years, and she has earned an outstanding reputation in that judicial role. Throughout my advisory committee's process, Judge Benjavengo has actually set herself apart as a person who would be truly exceptional. She was born in New Jersey. She began her undergraduate career at Rutgers. She earned a bachelor's in journalism and political science, earned a master's from Rutgers as well. She worked for a leading American corporation, Johnson & Johnson, in New Brunswick. She then attended the University of Michigan Law School, where she excelled, graduating magna cum laude, and was inducted into the Order of the Coif. After law school, she joined the San Diego firm Gray Carey and later became part of a major international law firm. She became a founding member of the firm's patent litigation group. Her knowledge of patent law, which she honed in law school and in private practice, made her a valued resource for her colleagues and clients. So she quickly rose. She was selected as the national co-chair of her firm's patent litigation group, a role in which she managed 70 patent attorneys. In 2005, she became a magistrate judge, a role in which she served as a serious and thoughtful jurist. Since her appointment, she has published 180 opinions, over 190 reports and recommendations, over 1,800 orders of non-dispositive motions. Roughly 800 of her orders involve felony criminal cases. She's got substantial expertise in patent law, which will be welcome in the district, which is part of a new federal judicial program designed to assign more patent cases to judges who are experts in the field of patent law. So she will be helpful. Judge Benjavengo has received high praise from any number of people. I know of no opposition to her confirmation. I think this advise and consent process will yield a very good, seasoned San Diego judge, magistrate judge for the district court, and I am very proud to recommend her and to have had unanimous consent of the Judiciary Committee for her confirmation. I see Senator Lee on the floor, and perhaps I could ask for unanimous consent when Senator Lee concludes, and if there is time left, that I be reverted to speak for a couple of minutes on morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President,
Senator from Utah is recognized.
I ask unanimous consent to speak for a period of time up to 7 minutes.
Senator has that time.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today in opposition to this nomination. I do so not because of the qualifications of this particular nominee, but instead I do so in defense of the U.S. Constitution. In opposing President Obama's appointments, I've repeatedly made clear that this is a constitutional issue. Each time I've spoken out, and I've done so on numerous occasions, I've set forth in detail the reasons why I believe, on a legal basis, on a constitutional basis, why President Obama's recent purported recess appointments are unprecedented and unconstitutional. I've also made absolutely clear that my opposition to President Obama's appointments is not partisan and that I will hold a Republican president equally accountable whenever any Republican president makes a similarly unconstitutional claim of power. This president has enjoyed my cooperation up to this point. I've voted for many, if not most, of his nominees. That cooperation can't continue, not in the same way that he has enjoyed it up until this point, in light of the fact that he has disrespected our authority within this body. He's disrespected the Constitution. Unfortunately, many of my colleagues have refused to engage on the real substance of this issue. Instead, they repeatedly change the subject to partisan politics, the nominations process, and Richard Cordray's qualifications to head the CFPB. Even worse, and despite my repeatedly making clear that I intend to hold any Republican president to the same standard here to protect the institutional and constitutional prerogatives of the Senate, rather than the interests of any political party, given that those are at stake, the Democrats, including the president himself, have accused me of playing politics. I want to be clear again, this is not the case. I'm here to defend the constitutional prerogatives of the Senate and the separation of powers and the system of checks and balances that are at the heart of our constitutional system. The Senate's advice and consent role is grounded in the Constitution's system of checks and balances. In Federalist number 51, James Madison wrote that the great security against the gradual concentration of the several powers in the same branch of government consists in giving to those who administer each branch the necessary constitutional means and personal motives to resist encroachments of the others. Among those constitutional means is the Senate's ability to withhold its consent for a nominee, forcing the President to work with Congress to address that body's concerns. The key conclusion that the Department of Justice's Office of Legal Counsel memorandum, on which President Obama relied in making these recess appointments, is that the President may unilaterally decide and conclude that the Senate's pro forma sessions somehow do not constitute sessions of the Senate for purposes relevant to the Recess Appointments Clause in Clause 3 of Article 2, Section 2. If allowed to stand, this deeply flawed assertion would upend an important element of the Constitution's separation of powers. Under the procedures set forth by the Constitution, it is for the Senate, and it's not for the President, to determine when the Senate is in session. Indeed, the Constitution expressly grants the Senate that prerogative, the power to determine the rules of its own proceedings. Commenting on this very provision in his authoritative constitutional treatise, Joseph Story noted that, quote, "The humblest assembly of men is understood to possess the power to make its own rules, and it would be absurd to deprive the councils of the nation of a like authority," close quote. And yet this is precisely the result of President Obama's attempt to tell the Senate when it is or is not in recess. I'm saddened that some of my colleagues in the Senate are not more jealous of this body's rightful, constitutional, institutional prerogatives. As they well know, the Constitution's protections do not belong to any one party. And its structural separation of powers is meant to protect against the abuses, present and future, of presidents of both parties. Acquiescing to the President in the moment may result in a temporary political gain for the President's party. But relinquishing this important piece of the Senate's constitutional role has lasting consequences for Republicans and Democrats alike. It is on this basis, and because of the oath that I've taken to uphold the Constitution of the United States, that I find myself duty-bound to oppose this nomination. And I strongly urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to take seriously their obligation, both to the Constitution and to the institutional prerogatives of the Senate, and to do the same. Thank you, Mr. President.